Back in Washington, Kipp Davis is getting his first look at a final prized fragment in the Museum of the Bible's collection.
This is a fragment that contains text from Genesis chapter 32, and it's supposedly from the 1st century BC or the 1st century CE.
Bible confirmed today that 5 of its 16 Dead Sea Scroll fragments are not real.
Further lab tests reveal that the chemical signatures of the sediments and inks found on the fragments don't match those typically found on authentic scrolls, confirming Kipp's suspicion that they are likely fakes.
And welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And with Dr. Kill, we had a name change going on over here.
Hi everyone. I'll use that hand to wave. Hi.
Dr. Kill Davis.
Oh, did you change it? Because I had put up Dr. Kipp there. Wow.
No, that's all good. I like it.
No, I know.
We're good. But yeah, man, I'm glad to have you back on. I had that nice extended intro just for you.
Hi everyone. If you don't know who I am, I'm Kipp Davis, and for years I've been a researcher on the Dead Sea Scrolls. My specialty, my specialization is predominantly the biblical textual criticism, the transmission of scripture, Second Temple Jewish history, paleography and scribal practices, prophecy and prophets in the scrolls. Yeah. So the Dead Sea Scrolls is a cache of over 900 individually identified manuscripts that now exist in tens of thousands of fragments. They were collected from 11 caves, which are within about a 1.5 kilometer distance of the ruins of a site on Wadi Qumran, which archaeologists tend to think was a settlement of a group of Essene Jews from about the 2nd century BC up until the destruction of Jerusalem, and then the march of the Roman army down to Masada, which is just south of the site on it's the western shore of the Dead Sea, another 30-40 kilometers, I believe it is. So what's remarkable about these manuscripts is they are mostly parchment, calf skins, to be precise. There are also a number of papyrus fragments. The entire collection is predominantly Hebrew, Aramaic, and there is one cave, cave number 7, which is entirely comprised of small, very small, tiny fragments written in Greek. And it's interesting, the relationship of this cave to the rest of the collection continues to be debated. The very idea that this is a collection is something that's also not without controversy or dispute. Most of the collection is oh no, I shouldn't say that. About about a third of the collection consists of fragments of what we call biblical manuscripts, and we can talk a little bit about this. Why I'm scare quoting this
Sure.
or air quoting this. Is that the same thing? Maybe
I
that's
guess it's the same thing. Yeah.
um, so these are copies. These are fragments of manuscripts which appear to be copies of texts that we know from the Hebrew Bible.
Hmm.
The rest of the collection consists of fragments from manuscripts that look like they're close related to the Bible. They sound biblical, but don't exist within our scriptures. And some of these are texts that we knew, texts from antiquity that we already knew of before, such as the Book of Jubilees or the books of Enoch, the stuff from the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, the Aramaic Levi document, things of this nature. Some of it, though, is literature that looks like it was circulating within Judaism at the time of Jesus that we just simply did not know about. There's all sorts of texts that scholars have identified with titles such as such as pseudo Ezekiel or pseudo Daniel or the Apocryphon of Jeremiah or the secret of the way things are, mysteries, instruction. So lots and lots of early Jewish literature. A number of the manuscripts contain collections of rules and rituals and writings that appear to have been produced by the sect itself, dealing with matters of day-to-day conduct, dealing with just their own theological disputes with other groups within Judaism, and other texts which deal with things that they were absolutely obsessed with, like intercalating the solar calendar into the current um, lunar solar calendar that was observed by the rest of, or probably most of the rest of Jews from the period. So the collection has been intensely interesting to scholars since its discovery, in large part because it provides text critical material of the Bible that takes us back almost 1,000 years from the manuscript evidence that we had on hand prior to the discovery of the scrolls in 1947. Prior to 1947, the largest complete manuscript of the Hebrew Bible was were the Leningrad Codex. The Aleppo Codex is a little bit older, but there's also a number of folios that are missing from that. So, and these date to the 9th, 10th century CE. So we're talking about, biblical texts that are almost 1,000 years older than this, date all the way back to the time of Jesus. In some cases, very, very close to their autographs, such as the Book of Daniel. There's fragments of the Book of Daniel at Qumran found in the Dead Sea Scrolls that date to the beginning of the 1st century. This is like within 60, maybe 70 years of the actual composition of the Book of Daniel. So
Wow.
it's hugely important. And then it's been of intense interest to not just scholars of the Bible, but also historians of the period, and those who are interested in the development of early Judaism and the emergence of early Christianity. The scrolls have been tremendously helpful
Right.
in grounding our understanding of who Jesus was, and where and the relationship really of the church to um, larger Judaism proper in the
Yeah.
1st century.
Let me jump in real quick. That
Yeah,
you
that's probably good for an intro
Well,
anyways.
that was a really good point that I want to address real quick, because you mentioned it tells us a lot about who Jesus was. Now, someone in the comments, someone watched this might say, "Wait a minute, I thought there was no Jesus in the Dead Sea Scrolls." What would you say about why it tells us that information?
Because this is our one of our best sources for life, uh, for Jewish life at the time of Jesus, and for Jewish belief at the time of Jesus. And one of the really interesting things that we see within the Dead Sea Scrolls is um some of the theology that's forwarded within the New Testament through Paul and the Gospels in particular. Um, for a long time, scholars a little bit dubious about where some of this came from. And with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see some linkage, some overlap between the way that the early Christians were thinking and the way that this one particular sect within Judaism was thinking. You know, one of a good example of this, just off the top of my head, I believe it's in Luke. I'm not sure. My New Testament prowess is not great. Um, but there's a story about John the Baptist. He's in prison, and then he sends a group of his followers, his disciples, to Jesus, asking him, "Are you the one that the prophet said is to come? Are you the one we've been waiting for, or should we move on? Is it someone else?" And he responds to him and says, "Say to John," very cryptically, he says, "I believe it's the the deaf hear, the blind see, the dead are raised, and the gospel is preached." And in this response, he's basically this is his cryptic way of saying, "I am the Messiah."
Right.
Um, and it's a conflation of three individual prophecies spread in Isaiah, I think between chapters 30 and chapter 62. I'm probably going to get that wrong. But there's these little snippets of prophetic
We're drawing from that.
statements.
Right.
Yeah, and putting them together, right? So this, at the surface of it, this looked like a Christian invention prior to 1947, when the scrolls were discovered. This is something that scholars would talk about as a like a purely Christian ideal. This conflation of these ideas. Well, within the collection, we actually found a manuscript which has these three individual prophetic declarations recorded together. um I believe it's I believe it's 4Q521. I might be wrong about that. It's been a while, but this is just an example of how the Dead Sea Scrolls have dramatically improved our understanding of the emergence of Christianity, where it came from, where some of these ideas were engendered, and just how far they spread.
Yeah. I remember talking to Dr. Tabor about this, because there's always there's this big debate as are the Christians Essenes? And it's like, okay, well, what is an Essene? That we start with there, and we start to, like, go off of that. Well, there's the rule book from the Dead Sea Scrolls about about the Sabbath, and we find out that the Sabbath, they're super strict about the Sabbath. These Essenes, even more strict than the Pharisees and the Sadducees are. And there's a rule where if your animal falls into a ditch on the Sabbath, you don't touch it. Well, Jesus actually says the exact opposite in one of the Gospels.
Right.
He says, if your animal falls into a ditch, aren't you going to go save it? So a lot of people say right there, oh, he can't be in a scene because of that. And I used to think that too, which is fine. It's a reasonable way to approach it. Obviously, if it's the opposite. So yeah, sure. It's very possible. But think about it like this. If he was in a scene, he could be against that rule, and he's addressing that rule. It doesn't mean he's not, like, you can't just say because think about it like this. Why would he be saying this at all if he doesn't know about this rule? And if he knows about this rule, he's at least around the Essenes. So I think there's a good case for both ways.
There's various ways of reviewing this, right? Like, another way to think about this is that the New Testament writers, the writers of the Gospels, at this later stage, in the time after Jesus, are trying to distance Jesus from the Essenes.
Right.
So, there's a variety of ways to look at it. I personally don't think that Christianity is an Essene movement, and I don't think Jesus was I don't think he was an Essene either. One of the things that that seems clear in the in our reconstructions of the historical Jesus is that his movement sparked enough anxiety within the Roman establishment for them to execute him.
Right.
This is a little bit different than what the Essenes were doing, and how they constructed their own theology of the last days. They were very passive in their resistance to the empire.
Yeah.
They were sitting out in the desert, literally quietly and waiting.
Yeah.
God to come down and basically wipe out their enemies. That's what they were doing.
Pliny the Elder basically is like hanging out with them and writing about them, and like, these guys are out here just kind of hanging out.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. And then if he's writing that in the 70s, if you would think if he was talking to them and talking with these people and writing about them, if Jesus was one of those guys, you'd think that's where he would have found out about him. But Pliny the Elder doesn't seem to know who Jesus was, or at least he doesn't write about him. So I think that's another thing to point out when you're thinking about, is Jesus in a scene, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, but I think, like, all that to say, it's not impossible either, right?
Right.
I mean, there have been, for a long time, there've been lots of very interesting ideas forwarded connecting Jesus to the Essene movement via John the Baptist and these sorts of things. So yeah, like, it's and we just really don't have any clear way to know,
Right.
given the information that we have on hand.
Now, I want to ask you about this. In the documentary, there was this big scandal of there being fake Dead Sea Scrolls. How does that happen? How do they get mixed up with the real ones? Tell us the story about these fake Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah, man. Sure. So this is something I'm pretty intimately familiar with. So it requires me telling a bit of a story.
Sure.
In 2012, I was hired to go and fill a research fellowship in Norway. And one of the things that I was commissioned to do there was to help publish Dead Sea Scrolls fragments within a very large private collection just outside of Oslo called the Skoyen collection. We published this book here. There it is. Gleanings from the Caves, Dead Sea Scrolls, and Artifacts from the Skoyen collection. So,
Nice.
and it's a pretty big book too.
Wow.
So Martin Skoyen, who is the owner of the Skoyen collection, he has 32 fragments of what we've now come to describe within scholarly circles as Dead Sea Scrolls like fragments, because for most of them they cannot be directly connected. Well, I should say the chain of custody or the provenance for most of these fragments is non-existent. Skoyen had started in the 1990s purchasing small bits of actual small, like tiny little Dead Sea Scrolls fragments from a couple of the scholars who were connected to the original discovery back in 1947. He bought a tiny fragment from from one QSB, which is known as the Rule of the Congregation, from the family of William Brownlee. William Brownlee was actually my Dr. Fodder, George Brooke. William Brownlee was his Dr. Fodder, so he's
Oh,
like
wow.
my Dr. Gross fodder, I guess. I don't know how that works, but
I guess that's what it's called. Yeah.
so anyways, but that's my one and only connection to William Brownlee. So he bought this tiny little fragment from the family of William Brownlee. Skoyen also managed to buy a fragment from the heirs of John Trevor. It was a small little flake from the Genesis Apocryphon. It actually has a couple of letters on it. And the story behind this is that when John Trevor was photographing the Genesis Apocryphon, he had taken the manuscript, he photographed it, he gave it back to the owner, who was Mar Athanasius Samuel. He was a Syrian Orthodox bishop at St. Mark's Monastery, I believe in Bethlehem. I might get that wrong too. Anyways, so he gives the manuscript back to him, and then like weeks later discovers that parts of it had actually flaked off into his briefcase, into his satchel. So he wrote Mar Athanasius Samuel a letter and said, I've got these little bits of fragment that fell off in my briefcase. How can I get them back to you? And the bishop very graciously said, you've done me a wonderful service. I'm going to gift you, these tiny little fragments. So this is how John Trevor came to be in possession of them. And then years later, after he had died, in the 90s, Martin Skoyen bought, this little flake from the Genesis Apocryphon to add to his collection. So Martin Skoyen's great claim to fame in the beginning was that he was the first private collector ever to own a fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls. In his estimation, we have some evidence that there were other anonymous private collectors who were buying stuff. And
Can you imagine holding on to that and being like, this is something that no one has owned for thousands of years?
I know.
Me.
Yeah.
That's weird. Like that, you're like connected to the past that way. That's crazy.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's such a, when Martin Skoyen tells the story, he is a very wealthy man. His father owned, a number of bus companies in Norway. So he's independently wealthy, and he's a very eclectic manuscript collector. Like he's got all sorts of things. He's got folios from the Vatican Library, and he's got one of the finest collections of Buddhist manuscripts in the world, like anywhere.
Wow.
And he has more recently gotten into huge amounts of trouble because he's lots of the stuff that he has purchased has been looted material from museums and from
It's like
temples
it's like
and stuff.
Hobby Lobby. Hobby
Yeah,
Lobby's
very
always
yeah.
they're
So
always
and
catching on.
we'll get to that, right?
Yeah.
So um eh, over time, over the course of the next, like from the 90s up until I believe it was 2006, he managed to find and purchase 32 fragments of what were thought to be Dead Sea Scrolls. Most of the stuff that he got, like he's actually got some real fragments, like I mentioned. Some of these early things that he purchased are indeed authentic Dead Sea Scrolls fragments. But then he got in touch with um, the son of the antiquities dealer who had originally brokered all the sales of the Dead Sea Scrolls that were being found by the Bedouin in the 40s and the 50s, and the archaeologists and the scholars at the Palestinian Archaeology Museum, which was located in Jordan at the time. So, and this private this antiquities dealer basically handled like over 90% of all the material. He basically brokered the sale of this stuff from the people who found it, the Bedouin and um sorry, the scholars. So we know that he had held back a couple of items. Most famously, when the Temple Scroll was discovered from Cave 11, which is the largest of the Dead Sea Scrolls and is intensely interesting because it is an exquisitely prepared manuscript, and it contains an alternative version of much of the book of Deuteronomy, but spoken in first person from the perspective of Yahweh himself. It's pretty wild. So, but when this was discovered, he held this back and said, you know what? I'm going to sit on this because this is going to be my retirement nest egg someday. This is back in, I believe it was 1957, 1958. And for years, there were people who knew that he had this manuscript. And one of the original members of the editorial team, his name is Frank Moore Cross, had started to enter into negotiations with Mr. Kando. This is the name of the antiquities dealer, in order to purchase the Temple Scroll. And at one point, he had secured funding to the tune of $1 million to buy the Temple Scroll. This is like back in the early 60s. The deal fell through for a variety of reasons. There's still quite a lot of cloak and dagger that surrounds all this stuff. Frank Moore Cross tells the story of meeting Mr. Kando either under a bridge or in like an abandoned mansion in Istanbul, where he sifts through like a box of
It's like an Indiana Jones
Oh,
scene.
it totally is. It's
Yeah.
wild. It's wild. So, anyways, because I said there were a number of people who knew of the existence of the Temple Scroll, one of these was Yigal Yadin, who was the son of Eliezer Sukenik. Eliezer Sukenik was a scholar at the Hebrew University, and one of the first scholars to see any of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So his son, Yigal Yadin, who was politically active, had over the time become like a major or a general in the Israeli army. And then after the 6-Day War in 1967,
Wow.
promptly, like literally the day after the war ended, and after Israel had annexed
and secured all this new
Yeah.
land in the West Bank and up north. Suddenly, Mr. Kando's house fell, into Israeli territory, and for the first time, and Yagel Yadin dispatches a couple of like government agents to uh, to Kando's house, basically to confiscate and take the
Wow.
temple scroll, which he had been hiding under the floorboards in
And
his
that's the
bedroom.
only temple scroll that existed?
That's the only temple scroll. Yeah.
No
So, and
way.
it's actually when you look at, maybe actually here I'll share
Yeah.
my screen and show you. Um, when you look at, I'll do the entire screen here.
There
So
it is.
this is the temple scroll here.
Yeah.
Can you see this?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I can
All
see it.
right. So, um, you'll notice that it's quite damaged.
Wow.
Um, but apparently all of this or
There's been a
you
lot of scholarship on this particular scroll, just in case
well,
anyone doesn't know.
there is a lot of scholarship on
Yeah.
this
And
particular scroll,
that's a
but
big deal that this happened.
yeah. So I mean, the word is that all the damage on the top of this manuscript here, all this water damage, this happened while it was sitting under the floorboards in William Kando's house.
Oh, so
So
he had almost
not
a
William Kando, sorry, in Kando's house. So we don't know.
it could have been almost perfect. Not perfect, but it could have
Well,
been, like, at least
probably
full.
not perfect, but you can see, I mean, some of this stuff at the
Yeah.
beginning here, we probably had a lot there was probably a lot more of it
Yeah,
there
yeah, yeah.
at one time, but it's now it looks like this, which it's
Yeah.
still incredible,
Those ones
but
look bad. Those ones,
like
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah, that's
anyways,
a crazy story.
so yeah, so that's yeah, that's
That's how
yeah,
it happened.
I
And then
sorry, I just
you
I talk a lot.
no, you're fine, but I was
I
in the documentary, and I'm gonna get to super chats right after this last question.
Okay.
You went in the documentary, you were talking about you had a suspicion of this. You knew you thought this was the
Right.
case before they figured this out.
Okay.
How did you even get to that?
Yeah,
Huh.
so sorry. Yeah, thanks for getting me back on track here.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is Kando. We know that he had stuff that he had held back, right? And then after he died, Martin Scoyan went to his son and said, "Hey, can you look through your dad's records to see if you can find receipts for stuff that he sold to other private collectors? I'd like to track them down and see if they might be interested in selling their Dead Sea Scrolls to me." And so he managed to purchase, I believe, 4 more fragments this way. And then after that, he went back to them and said, I know your dad held some stuff back. Perchance, did he have any fragments from Enoch or from Kings or First or Second Samuel? And lo and behold, they found these fragments and sold them to him. So this, over the course of time, he managed to amass a collection of 32 fragments. At the same time, other buyers were getting into the market. There's another he's like an old bookseller by the name of Lee Biondi, was contacted and provided the opportunity to sell Dead Sea Scrolls fragments in America. And a number of these fragments have ended up being circulated to a number of evangelical Christian institutions. There's 4 of these fragments, sorry, 5 at the Azusa Pacific University in Azusa, California. It's a Christian school. There's another fragment that's at a seminary in Asbury, Ohio, Ashland, sorry, Ohio, I think. The Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary ended up buying 8 or 9 of these
Wow.
fragments. The Museum of the Bible they kind of entered the antiquities market. I should say the the family that owns Hobby Lobby,
Oh, right,
the
right.
David Green family.
Yeah, they're always getting
So
their hands dirty on these things.
yeah, so they entered the antiquities market sometime after 2007 or 2008. They started buying up all sorts of stuff, like crazy amounts of stuff, and escalating the prices to the point where a guy like Skoyan uh just couldn't compete anymore, so he stopped buying, and they ended up with a number of fragments in their collection, which eventually came to form the collection of the Museum of the Bible. So here I am in 2012 working on the fragments in the Skoyan collection, and uh, I think it was probably at some point by early 2013 we had a very good paleographer doing the paleography for the volume. His name is Michael Langlois. He teaches at the University of Strasbourg in France. So he started to raise concerns that he thought maybe some of the fragments might be fakes, and just on the basis of his script analysis. And so he confessed this to like a couple of us in private, and in after the fact, when he's done interviews and things like that, he's talked about how he was always really nervous about what the reaction would be, so he kind of just kept it to himself, told a couple of people, but didn't really broadcast this all over the place. And then myself and another one of my colleagues, Orstein Jusnes, who teaches at the University of Agder in Kristiansand, Norway. He and I both started putting together basically a very large memo of what we came to see as inconsistencies or problematic criteria on the Skoyan fragments that seemed odd, seemed out of character for authentic manuscripts. And as such, we were worried that Michael might be right about this. So we put together this memo. We had flagged at the time over 20 of his 32 fragments, and in response to this, he said, "Well, he's like, I don't want to publish anything that's a fake. This project was already 10 years in the work. This book." The chief editor had been working on it for a decade already by this time. So he's like, I don't want to publish anything that's fake. We need to be sure. So he authorized testing for a handful of the fragments to take place in Berlin. There's a very good physicist at the I'm gonna get this wrong. Maybe I can look it up here. It's called I just know it by the acronym, the bomb in Berlin, and it's got a horrible, that's an acronym for a horrible, terribly lengthy German name.
Oh yeah.
The Baum Federal Institute for Materials Research and Testing. So
Nice.
They ran tests on some of the fragments that's going sent, and came back and said, we can't prove that these are fakes. We can't prove they're authentic either. But based on the battery of tests that we have made, it sure looks like there's modern inconsistencies on these fragments, which lead us to think that, yeah, they probably are not
Wow.
authentic. So that's kind of where it started. And then around this time, this would have been summer 2014, I was asked by the chief editor of the Dead Sea Scrolls at the Museum of the Bible collection to come on board and help him out with editing the fragments and publishing the collection, which appears in this book, which has since been discontinued by the publisher because we're pretty convinced that all the fragments at the Museum of the Bible are forgeries. So so at the same, so while I agreed, yes, I'll come on board and I'll help. I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which was the way the Museum of the Bible operated at the time. They
And
no longer
you were a
operate like
Christian
this.
at this time, right?
Uh
No, okay, but
nah,
you
maybe
were
not.
before this. Okay,
I was a Christian when I arrived in Norway.
yeah.
Um,
I'm
by
just
the
trying to
time
gauge
I
sometimes.
left, I was really not sure. So
Well,
I
the
was
reason
kind of
why I asked that, and I promise I'm gonna get the super chats right after this. The reason why I asked that is because in the documentary, you seem very emotional, like kind of upset that they were fake.
well, I
Like
am.
you were like, I really wanted
I
these to be
am.
real.
I do.
Yeah,
Of course, I want them to be
I guess
real,
you don't have to be a
but
Christian.
it has nothing. It has nothing to do. It's not a faith question for me, right?
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
get that. Okay.
I think antiquity is cool as hell. I
Right,
mean,
me too.
why wouldn't I want these things to be real? Because
I agree.
they're useful, they're helpful
Yeah,
for expanding our understanding of the text and the history. So all that stuff, right?
yeah,
Um, and I should clarify here too. Um, there was never, when I started working at the Museum of the Bible, they never asked. There was never any kind of discussion of my own personal
sure,
beliefs, or they were interested in was my expertise.
right.
So and what I told them too, when I took this job, I had to sign this non-disclosure agreement, which was super annoying. But I told them, I said, look, I said, um, I have to be able to feel free to publish my findings
Right.
regardless of what they are.
Yeah.
There was actually I'll I'll continue here with the in the timeline. This was the summer 2014. I started looking at the additions, and because I had signed this non-disclosure agreement, I was basically, I was not allowed to share any of the photographs or any of the research that I had in hand with other colleagues. And this is unusual. Like within scholarship,
Right.
if I have a friend who's working on a manuscript and I know it, um, I can write him and say, "Hey, I'm really interested to know this."
Yeah.
And he would send me like a draft
Right.
of his entire work, on the condition that I not plagiarize it.
Right.
So, but this is the way scholars work. We're very collaborative.
Yeah.
As a rule, this is what I'm used to. So this was very strange for me
It is
to
weird.
to not be able to basically collaborate and interact with
Yeah.
colleagues. But I was also in an incredibly fortunate, unique position where, on the one hand, I had access to all of Scoian's material, all of his fragments. On the other side, I have access to all of the Museum of the Bible's collection. And I was the only person on earth who, who had this kind of access. So I was sitting here looking at the stuff in the Museum of the Bible, comparing it to the stuff that was in the Scoian collection, going, holy crap. Like, the same problems persist in both of these private collections. So it was a real eye opener. And at that
Yeah.
point, I started, like, the individual editors of the fragments for the volume, the Museum of the Bible volume itself. I started sending, in the material that they would send me to edit, I started responding, these are indications of forgery to me. This looks like it could be a forgery to me.
Sure.
The one in charge of the project, I started, like, waving my hands and going, I think these are forgeries, and it's
And
not
you
something that we can talk about openly
and
because
you're someone who's worked on the real ones. You saw it. You
yeah,
had it. You've been around them so much
yeah.
that it's second nature for you to look at these things and examine
But
them.
to be fair, this gentleman uh probably has done more work on the authentic Dead Sea Scrolls than
Sure.
almost anybody, but he
Wow.
didn't see the same things
Yeah,
that I
those
did either,
they're
right?
pretty well done. You can
So it's complicated.
yeah.
We had a at the annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature in 2014. It was in San Diego. It was so great. I distinctly remember having a wonderful afternoon sitting at a cafe just outside of my hotel room in the third week of November, eating fish tacos and drinking a Corona while I was, working on my. So I don't know. Sorry, I just I loved being
That's
in San
awesome.
Diego. So
Yeah.
at the annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature in San Diego in 2014. We had a meeting for basically the publication team for the Museum of the Bible, and I was scheduled to give a presentation.
Mhm.
So when I got up there, I started going through my presentation and basically said, I've come across all these extremely problematic features in these fragments. These make me extremely nervous. I'm concerned, and I think that these are probably forgeries. And the Greens were not there at the meeting, but basically the leader, the director of the entire collection, the curator, the leaders over the the publications and the scholarship were all there, and I was very relieved when they came back and said it doesn't matter um, what the results are. uh, you're welcome to publish your
Right.
findings, whatever you think. So
Wow.
in the end, what ended up happening, and this is maybe something I'm a bit dissatisfied with the volume, and what's really problematic about the volume is that each individual editor was basically given um, control over the chapter. I mean, there were things as like as an editor of the volume, I could make recommendations. I could make um I could make corrections, but in terms of the I guess the direction of the argument,
Sure.
that kind of belonged to the individual scholars doing the individual editions. And I said to almost all of them. I think there were a couple I was not sure of at the time, but for well over half of the fragments in that volume, to the editors, I said, I really think these are forgeries. I think they're problematic. I think at a minimum, you should at least talk about this or introduce this
Wow.
as a problem.
That's
And
good work on you, though. You did a good job for that,
well, yeah. But nobody, I mean, very, very few people took me up on that.
Wow.
So, and I was then asked to write a like an introductory chapter to the volume. So I wrote this chapter in here. Let me just find it.
Sure.
It's this one here. There we go. Paleographical and physical features of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Museum of the Bible Collection, a
Nice.
synopsis. So, and in this chapter, I basically went through all the scribal stuff, and a review of the paleography. And in that chapter, I basically said, there's a lot of problematic features here, which could lead us to believe that a number of these fragments are forgeries. And I pointed some of these out more explicitly within the text. So there's a bit of an unbalanced perspective within the book itself, right? Because on the one hand, I've got this chapter where I'm going, I think a bunch of these are forgeries, and then for the rest of the volume, it virtually gets ignored. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
Interesting.
around the same time, Scoian had allowed us to also publish an article about the forgeries in his collection. What we ended up coming to what I thought was a really frustrating compromise with him, where he wanted to go forward with the volume but didn't want any discussion at all about forgery. So he wanted us to tell him which ones we were certain were authentic and which ones we were certain were not. We're going, well, it doesn't really work like that. Like, you can't prove it
Yeah.
one way or the other. You can have strong suspicions, you can have piles of evidence, but the only way to prove authenticity is to tie the individual artifact back to the site of its discovery.
Right.
And that was impossible to do with Scoian's collection. So we said, okay, we feel okay about these fragments. we feel like these ones for sure are extremely problematic. So he says, okay, we'll pull all these out of the volume. We're not allowed to talk about them at all in the volume, but you can write this article. So we wrote this article and published it in Dead Sea Discoveries, and basically from that point, that got picked up by the media, and then they wrote about it in Haaretz in Israel, and they wrote about it in the Guardian, and CNN wrote a bunch of stories about it, and the New York Times never did, but yeah. So, anyways, and yeah, that kind of ended up blowing the whole lid off.
Wow,
the thing.
that's a crazy story. That really is a crazy.
It's a crazy story. Yes. So,
well, I want to talk about that a little bit more, because there's a few things I want to talk about for particular scrolls. But let's hit these super chats first. People have been waiting. Jim Markstein.
I'm sorry, everyone.
Oh no, you're fine. You're fine.
All right.
Jim Markstein, thank you for the super chat. What's the biggest difference between a Dead Sea Scrolls manuscript and what is in the Hebrew Bible?
So this is a it's an excellent question.
Yeah.
It's a surprisingly complicated question.
Ooh.
So I guess part of my answer here is to explain that when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, there was such an overwhelming amount of material. The first scholars who were tasked with organizing it and basically studying it and getting it ready for publication, their first job was basically sifting through individual little fragments that were just coming in to the museum, largely just at random, identifying it. Well, first they cleaned it, then they identified it, then they were tasked with identifying it and, separating them out into, basically what belongs together, what's separate. So right away they used existing classificatory systems that we have. And the first basic division that they made between manuscripts is what is biblical and what is non-biblical.
Right.
And anything that matches a text of one of the three existing editions of the Old Testament, these being the Masoretic text, the Septuagint, or the Samaritan Pentateuch, these three, any text that looked like they aligned very closely with those editions were classified as biblical manuscripts. Virtually everything else was then, set aside as non-biblical. Part of the problem here is that there's like a fuzzy middle.
I was going to say a gray area.
Right? There's a gray area. There is a dividing line which is not straight. It's very blurry, where there's a number of significant important differences in the several of the manuscripts that were discovered compared to what's actually in our existing editions. Maybe one of the most famous ones is in one of the manuscripts of 1 Samuel that came from K4. I think it's chapter 8. It's the story of Nachash. There is actually the insertion of an entire complete paragraph.
Wow.
Of text that was missing from all of our.
And is this particular passage found anywhere else, or just in this particular scroll?
Nowhere else. So there's evidence that Josephus was aware of something that looked like it.
That's crazy.
But it was completely unknown. So, right away, is this a biblical text or is it a non-biblical text?
What do you label that as? Because
right,
a giant change to what's in the
If it's got this huge change in it, and it's not a terribly consequential change. In fact, the change itself has been incorporated into at least the NRSV English translation of the Bible.
Nice.
Probably other English translations.
Good for
as
them.
well.
I would too.
Sure.
I would add it too.
and it's cool. It basically provides some contextual background information on who this Nachash character was, who laid siege on Yabesh Gilead.
Doesn't that mean serpent, Nahash?
Yeah, it does.
Oh,
So
interesting.
it's yeah. Yeah. So that's that's a
That's a
whole
good.
other discussion. It's not
That's a
really
good answer.
not really relevant to
No, that was a great.
this,
I think
but it's
that's what he was looking for, right? That was a
so
great answer.
yeah. But there's other stuff too. Like there's a large chunk of material that is that's different. There's conceptual things
Sure.
that are different. For example, one of my favorites is a fragment of the Song of Moses in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 32, where it preserves basically an alternative text that looks like the Greek translation of the Septuagint was based on,
Mm.
um, but was not surviving anywhere in Hebrew. Here we have a Hebrew manuscript which basically attests to a polytheistic worldview within early Judaism. I mean, this manuscript
Oh,
dates,
yeah.
it's like dates to
Can,
the first century.
can you
So
tell us about this real quick? Because this is fascinating stuff.
right,
Just
okay.
yeah. This is
So
you guys are gonna love this.
in your Bibles, if you turn your Bibles to Deuteronomy chapter 32 verses 8, I'm just going to pull it up here. 32 8. Oh, whoopsies. Sorry, I made a mistake. Okay. So the text in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. In the Masoretic text, it reads this. So this is actually the I'll pull up an English translation that
Sure.
people will be. Let's see. No, they've made the correction. I bet they haven't. No, yeah, they haven't. So in the NIV,
Sure.
Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 to 9 says, when the Most High, and that's Elyon in Hebrew, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel. For Yahweh's portion, the Lord's portion, is his people, Jacob, his allotted inheritance. Right away, the question is raised, well, how can Yahweh receive an inheritance from himself? Right
What?
away, the
So,
text itself,
so they're separating El from Yahweh. I'm guessing. I'm guessing.
yeah, right.
What?
So
Those two.
in the
That's
Septuagint,
polytheism.
well, hold on here. Yeah. So in the Septuagint, the text reads, instead of reading, he set up the boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel, it says he set up the boundaries of the people according to the number of the angels. So right away, oh, hey, look, my light just,
It's Yahweh. Yahweh.
it's Yahweh.
Little
So,
shine light on you for bringing light to the
thank you.
situation.
Thank you. So scholars, even before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, were already uh, they already had a pretty clear idea that the Greek translation was based on a text which was corrupted, a Hebrew text which was corrupted, and the Greek translation probably reflected something that was there in the beginning. So we found this fragment from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it preserves what most scholars, or virtually all scholars, except for maybe a couple of hacks on YouTube, um, believe to be the original text of Deuteronomy 32. So I'll read it in
Yeah.
the NRSV. When the Most High, or when Elyon, apportioned the nations, when he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of the gods.
Wow.
Yahweh's own portion was his people, Jacob, his allotted share. So, what's happening in this passage is clearly Elyon, the king of the gods, is dividing up the territories of all the earth and giving to each of the individual gods within his pantheon their inheritance, basically their land.
Wow.
So this would be, here you go, Chemosh, yours is Moab,
Yeah.
right? Here you go, Dagon, yours is Philistia.
Yeah. And
So here you go, Yahweh, yours is Israel.
right.
So
I'm just showing a Wikipedia page, but this is
yeah,
there was a Canaanite
so
pantheon that we know about.
yes,
So
and
it's
now
not like
we
crazy.
have the physical evidence from
Right.
the Dead Sea Scrolls, which preserves this original reading. So that's huge. I mean, that's huge, but
Yeah.
it's just a little fragment. So, and I will say one more thing about this, um, in terms of understanding, differences in the Dead Sea Scrolls compared to the Hebrew Bible. Another one of the more famous, incredible manuscripts discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls that doesn't get talked about, I don't think, nearly enough, is the so-called 11Q Psalm Scroll. This is a magnificent document. It's nearly intact, and it comprises a significant portion of the Book of Psalms as we have it within the Hebrew Bible. But the really remarkable thing about this manuscript is that it contains a number of important textual differences with the Masoretic Book of Psalms, um, which is where our English Book of Psalms is translated from. But it also preserves these psalms in a different order than what appears in the Hebrew Bible. And it's not the entire book of Psalms either. It's like the last third. I think it's mostly uh like chapters Psalm 90 up through 150. But in addition to that, it also contains psalms that we had never before seen. There's a text in there called the Apostrophe of Zion, which nobody ever knew before, and it's plopped right there in the middle between like Psalm 142 and Psalm 143. There contained within this manuscript are also Psalm 154 and 155, which we know from the Ethiopic and the Syrian book of Psalms. So here's a manuscript which, yes, biblical text,
Right.
uh, or not biblical text, because even though it's clearly preserving what we've got in our Hebrew Bible, um, really, really different. Some unbelievable, compelling, interesting differences, which raises all sorts of questions about, the shape of Scripture and the idea of Scripture in Second Temple Judaism, the development of the text, all sorts of stuff. So I hope
That
that
was a
that
great answer and great question, by the way.
yeah, excellent question. Uh,
Awesome, Matt. Awesome. I think I read that right. Awesome, Matt. Awesome. Thank you for that super chat. Any update on the new round of carbon dating from Groningen?
I think that's awesome, Matt. Awesome. Um, Sadly, no. I wish. Just to let everyone know, there is for a number of years now, there has been a new, very interesting project underway at the University of Groningen, which is in the Netherlands, to uh, basically try to identify the individual scribal hands within the Dead Sea Scrolls, and in order, one of the ways that they're seeking to do this is through machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I've seen some pretty interesting presentations, scholarly presentations on the results of this. Um, Another one of the features of this project was to redate, basically run new carbon carbon-14 tests on a large number
Nice.
of the Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts. So uh, it's been a long time since I've been in touch with the people who are involved in this project, but I can tell you that just by way of background, the Dead Sea Scrolls, or a number of the Dead Sea Scrolls, have been carbon dated twice. Interestingly enough, uh, around the time that the carbon-14 dating started to become, um, oh, what's the word basically when it was invented, when
Right.
scholars started when
Became a
scientists
statement.
started doing this,
Yeah.
one of the first subjects of carbon dating was the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Wow.
So, and basically there was, I think, I'm gonna get this wrong, it was probably maybe a dozen manuscripts were selected and dated using C14. And long story short, the C14 dates have really helped basically to calibrate or to confirm the paleographical datings, or the datings of the manuscripts according to their scripts.
And they come. What do they come to the first century BC/AD? Like right in there, like that.
Yeah.
That's a sweet.
So basically, yeah, second century BC,
Oh, wow.
maybe as early as late third century BCE, up to the
Wow.
first century CE. So, and then I think another 20 manuscripts were carbon dated in the 1990s. Um, and now more recently, I believe the Groningen project has asked the Israel Antiquities Authority for 150
Wow.
manuscripts to sample. This is extremely contentious because, as no doubt your audience is aware, the only way to carbon date things is to combust them. You have to
Here.
destroy the material. So, and actually, when you're at the Shrine of the Book, or in the laboratory where they do the work on the Dead Sea Scrolls, you will encounter, like, I was there in 2015 working on some stuff, and on one of the plates, that which is and a plate is basically like, it's like, it sounds like it's a big uh
Yeah.
plate that has the fragments arranged on it, and under protective coverings and glass and stuff, and you're not allowed to touch them at all, right?
Yeah.
The lab technicians do all the work. You just basically point and tell them what to do, what you want to see, and they, prepare
Wow.
things, and you look at them under the microscope and stuff. So, but on this plate there's also like handwriting uh in notes that are accompanying the plate, and there's one or two fragments which have like chunks obviously cut out of them. And in the notes, it's like, yeah, this was so this piece was taken off by Megan Broshi when he was doing his carbon dating test. So it's gone. They
Wow.
burned it up. So of course, because the Dead Sea Scrolls are deteriorating, like, you can see this when you compare a number of the incredible modern, most recent photographs, which are available at the Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls digital Dead Sea Scrolls library. There's lots of fragments which have very obviously deteriorated considerably
Yeah.
from like the 40s and the 50s. And the reason for this is because of, pesky people who want to see them.
Touching them too
Uh,
much. Yeah.
the worst thing for manuscripts is light and air,
Wow.
which is why they survive so long in the dark,
Yeah. In the
dry
caves.
cave,
In those caves. Yeah.
right?
That's crazy.
So the IAA is really pushing back on this because they're very concerned about the amount of material that's going to be required to run these C14 tests. I know the last I heard, and this was probably about a year ago, they were negotiating with the Groningen people about how many manuscripts which manuscripts, which fragments to use for their carbon dating tests. And as far as I know, it hasn't happened yet. But my information is not current.
Wow, that's interesting. Thank you for that super chat too. Mojo has a great question. I try not to just do super chats. If people have questions, I try to find out. It's easier to see it when you do a super chat though. This one I happened to catch my eye on while I was scrolling down. Thank you for the question, Mojo. Does Dr. Kipp find some elements in his studies that he thinks sounds very similar to Islamic elements?
I'm well, I wouldn't know because I really don't know. I know very, very little, I'm afraid,
About Islam? Yeah.
about Islam. So there has, to my knowledge, there's not been much serious exploration
And we're
from
talking
scholars.
centuries later, five,
Is
6, or 7
I
actually,
mean,
7
yeah.
centuries later. Yeah.
So,
So,
but
but it's an interesting question though.
it is an interesting question. Just, I mean, as far as I know, Islam is essentially an amalgamation of like tribal Arabian religions and Christianity, Judaism. So I mean, I don't think any of the stuff that survives in Islam, I suspect is much more closely connected to like medieval Christianity and medieval Judaism
Yeah.
than it is to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Sorry,
No,
I just don't know.
that was a good question. I thought I'd throw it at you. Constellation Paga says, "Thank you
Two
so
big
much for your super
examples.
chat. Can you give us 2 big examples of what atheists should know about the Dead Sea Scrolls?" I'm not up to speed on that. Interesting,
Okay,
specific question. I like it. I like it.
atheists should know that I'm doing a whole series of videos and hopefully
Ooh,
turning this into a book about
he's
what I think everybody should know about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, uh, to say two things, um, I think first and foremost, and I've already alluded to this, as much as the Dead Sea Scrolls have been tremendously useful in helping to establish and confirm the reliability of the text of the Hebrew Bible, what doesn't get talked about enough is how much they also raise significant questions about the transmission process and the shape of the text stretching back further into antiquity. So yes, and basically what I mean, like, I mean, we have copies of the text of the Hebrew Bible as it survived into, the medieval period, and they look very, very close. But we also have manuscripts that look really, really different that quite often don't get talked about enough. And one of the reasons they don't get talked about enough is because lots of these texts just don't they evade classification as a quote unquote biblical manuscript. One of the most famous examples of this is something called the Reworked Pentateuch. Um, and this is a collection of manuscripts. A number of them look like they are individual copies of the same work of the same text, but a couple of them look like they're completely different. Um, but they are close enough. They're so close. They're kind of right in this mushy middle between what's, you know a very, very close copy of a biblical text and something that is just completely different. Um, and for a long, long time, scholars just didn't know how to classify these things. We talked about them as rewritten Bible, which is like a catch-all for anything that was close to the Bible, but not close enough to call a quote unquote biblical text. Of course, these are modern labels, right?
right.
We have no idea whether, and we have no reason to think that people in antiquity thought about the text in the same terms that we did, or even thought about um, what matches in the same way that we did. So it's a complex question. So that's one thing. Um, what else? Uh, oh, I don't know. I'm sorry, Constellation Pegasus. I'm gonna have to go with that.
Well, if you
Uh,
think of it, we can always
if I think of
say,
anything
"Oh, I
else, I'll
thought
jump
of it."
back in.
Because
Sorry.
Constellation Pegasus is always in the chat. So we'll think of something.
True enough.
So we can, yeah.
All right.
Thank you for that, Constellation Pegasus. Always love having you around. Thank you for that super chat. Vesper, thank you for the super chat. Is he the guy with the Book of Enoch in Aramaic?
Is he the guy with the Book of Enoch in Aramaic? Is who the guy?
Oh, maybe the guy
Um,
you were talking about in your story. The guy who had the
Oh,
the manuscripts.
yeah. I wonder if so. I I suspect probably no. I wonder if maybe Vesper is referring to JT Millick, who might have been one of the greatest biblical scholars of all time. He was like a savant or a polymath. He was
Yeah, his name is all
like
over
a
all the
crazy genius.
all the commentaries and like sources. His name is everywhere.
Yeah, he's a crazy mad genius.
When you're getting into this field, you'll see his name pop up everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So JT Millick was part of the original editorial team, and he was tasked with publishing uh, all the fragments of the Book of Enoch that were discovered at Qumran. And what's really interesting is that so we knew of the Book of Enoch prior to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we had copies, translations of the Book of Enoch into Greek and into Ethiopic. And they're pretty wildly different from one another.
That's what I've heard.
We knew scholars were absolutely certain that the Book of Enoch was originally written in Aramaic, but there was not a single manuscript of Aramaic Enoch anywhere.
Yeah.
And then when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, we found piles of fragments of Enoch
Was there a
in
Greek?
Aramaic.
Was there ever a Greek one too? Because I know the Book
At
of
Qumran?
Jude. No, I'm not at Qumran, just in general.
Yes.
Okay.
So Greek and Ethiopic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the main two.
Yeah. So so this is very exciting. Right away we found, the Aramaic Enoch. The other things that we found though were things like portions of the Book of Enoch that didn't even survive in translation. You know, uh something called the Astronomical Book or something called the Book of the Giants
Yeah. That's,
look like they were part of the Book of Enoch, but never made it into these later translations into Greek or Ethiopic. I think there's a Slavonic Enoch as well. I could be wrong about that, but anyways, JT Millick collected all the Enoch stuff together, and he published a very very large book called the Books of Enoch. And it's a fantastic piece of scholarship. Millick is an interesting guy just because he was so bright and he was so good at doing the work that I think he had a tendency to get ahead of himself. You'll discover in his volume, the Books of Enoch, uh, the the fragments like the text at Qumran is very very fragmentary. There's lots of gaps. Lots of it we don't have. He would reconstruct what he thought was there in the gaps, and did so quite brilliantly. Actually, one of the key factors in convincing I and my colleagues that some of Scoian's fragments were forgeries was because of how a couple of these fragments of Enoch that Scoian had in his collection matched Millick's transcription.
wow.
What he had imagined to be in the in the gaps.
That's
And
crazy.
our first
Now,
thought,
that right there, you should show people who criticize the Q people. Like,
yeah,
wait, we got some good scholars who in the past have guessed things, and sure enough, they were right. So don't get too critical of Q.
or
They might be
yeah,
right. You never know.
or wrong. because this is sort of how the conversation. This is sort of how our thinking evolved on this. My friend Orstein Jusnes was the one who was working on these fragments, and he used to come to me and tell me, he's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe what a genius J.T. Millick was. He was incredible. The insight that he had into these texts." But then over time, we're like, no, you know what? It's pretty clear. It's obvious. It's what's happening here is whoever is making these forgeries has Millick's edition
Right.
of Enoch open, and he's basically just making a fragment to match what
Wow.
Millick was guessing at, right?
Wow.
So, but on that note, my friend Michael Langlois has said this to me, and I think he's right about this. That like 90% of the time, when scholars attempt to reconstruct, make suggestions of what's in the gaps, um, we're wrong.
Wow.
Most of the time,
So let me just
we
clarify
are
something.
wrong.
Was that the one that I thought that I was saying that he got it right? That turned out to just be a fake. He didn't get anything right at all.
Well, we don't know.
Okay. We never found
I mean,
anything.
who knows? Maybe Millick really is right about
Okay.
what the original
let me just
text
clear,
looked like,
I just wanted to clear that up. Okay.
but we're fairly certain that the fragments in Scoian's collection were copied from Millick's edition of
Wow.
Enoch.
So okay. So now the people who criticize Q, maybe you are on good ground.
Maybe you are on his side. And honestly, and I will say that that I am waffling on Q.
Yeah. Yeah.
And honestly, I don't know. Like you just who can say? I think Goodecke makes a very, very good case.
Yeah. So does John Kloppenborg and
Yeah.
obviously Dennis McDonald.
I'm not ready
They're
to
smart guys. They're
I'm
smarter
not
than I
ready
am.
to abandon Q, but I
Yeah,
think
these people are way smarter than me, so I take
I
their word
think
for it.
it's
But I understand the hesitancy from other people.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
totally. So,
Yeah,
but
thank you for that.
that's yeah. I hope that was the question.
That was
That
That was great. That was great. Thank you for that super chat. Paul Kickling is in the chat. That mofo's greed screwed it up for the rest of us. If that's not proof of Satan's work in our world, I don't know what is. Dead Sea Scrolls are so great as well.
Hail Satan. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Who's Satan working for in this scenario?
I was just watching.
Is
I
he
just saw
working for
someone.
the
I
forgers?
just saw a really good meme that Satan is really just God when he's drunk.
I don't know. Or maybe better yet, Satan is just God when he's sober.
Yeah, maybe it's the other way around. All those all those genocides in
Oh.
the Book of Joshua. Anyways,
Thank you, Paul, for
Yeah.
the super chat. I don't know if I if I can agree about Satan's work, but I definitely agree that the Dead Sea Scrolls are great.
Right, exactly. Constellation Pegasus, thank you, love you. Seems to me Jehovah wasn't too concerned keeping
Yeah.
his books preserved enough to avoid future confusion and frustration. Why should we care if he
Okay.
doesn't?
Absolutely. I think this is a great question, and
Yeah.
I think this is a great way to clear up, I think, what survives as a misapprehension about just the development of Judaism and early Judaism. Um, we've got this idea, and it's a very modern idea that that the text was so incredibly important to people in antiquity that they were at absolute pains to preserve it intact. And that really doesn't seem to be what the evidence suggests. You know, the people who wrote and collected the Dead Sea Scrolls very obviously had a strong awareness of variability within within the Hebrew text. They could see. I mean, they had different versions of the Hebrew text side by side to one another. They knew and they understood that there are huge differences. They promoted them. One of the things that people who were writing in the Second Temple period were doing were exploring the biblical text in these wide, crazy, dynamic ways which in effect changed the text. So it's absolutely a myth that that there was all that much concern about precision and exactitude when it came to the text. What was really important was currency. People at the time seemed most concerned about ensuring that the text aligned with their own circumstances and their own situations, what they happened to be going through at the time. So, but that's a great question,
Yeah, great point
Constellation
too.
Pegasus.
Great point. Thank you for that. Chris, thank you for the super chat. Do the Dead Sea Scrolls strengthen the JEDP
JEDP.
hypothesis? What is that?
So the JEDP hypothesis is
Oh,
otherwise known
Yahweh's
as
Elois.
this is
Okay.
the
Yeah.
documentary hypothesis,
Right,
which
right, right.
is a very
Good
uh
question. Good
it's
question.
it's a good question. So just by way of background, this is the prevalent idea within um critical scholarship that the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses, the Torah, were compiled from separate sources. The JDP theory, or the documentary hypothesis, says that these books were compiled from 4 separate written sources that they've identified with individual letters: J, which stands for Yahwist; E, which stands for Elohist; D, which stands for Deuteronomist, or the Book of Deuteronomy. Although I do believe that documentary hypothesis proponents find evidence of D elsewhere in the Torah. And then P,
Priestly.
which is the priestly source. Um, and so these were 4 individual documents that an editor came and basically very cleverly wove together to make this grand narrative as we have it, which now comprises the Torah. There's tons of very compelling evidence
Yeah.
for this.
Like, let me jump in for a second. I
But
want to throw this at you. The one I think is the most obvious is the story of Joseph getting sold down in Egypt. You have one paragraph, he's with the Midianites. The next paragraph, he's with the Ishmaelites, and then he keeps getting. It seems like, if you're reading it in one coherent paragraph, it's like he's getting traded back and forth between these 2 caravans. But really, when you take a look at it and take a step back, you can see there's 2 stories getting stitched together into one.
mashed together.
Makes a lot of sense.
If you're interested, and I don't see, like, there's lots of stuff on YouTube about the documentary hypothesis. Inspiring Philosophy just did a 2 video series about the documentary hypothesis,
Let me guess.
basically
It's not
pointing out.
true.
Well, I mean, he's not. So I'll say this for him. He's not wrong that there's problems with it.
Sure.
Like, it's not a perfect theory, right? And scholars have been pointing out the problems
Why
for
still a hypothesis?
a long time. It's a hypothesis. It's still a pretty compelling one. Like, it still holds power. But there's other ones too. There's the supplementary hypothesis, or the fragmentary hypothesis, or the 2 source theory. All of which, but the important thing to note here is that critical scholars, whether they hold to one of these models, all agree
There's something there
that the Pentateuch, the Torah, was compiled from earlier source material, whether it was written source material, or whether some of this stuff was oral, or it's still basically ways of going around solving the same problems that exist within the Pentateuch. But what I wanted to sort of plug here is, on my channel, and maybe if you could bring it up, if this is something that people are really interested in, if you go to scroll down right here, I've got 3 videos here. Stop right there. I've got one. The title card says "Inspiring Philosophy Doesn't Understand the Documentary Hypothesis."
Where is
the
that
next one? That's, you just had it.
Oh,
Next one. There you go. This is part of my "Is Genesis 1 to 11 Reliable" series. The final 3 videos in that series are all about the documentary hypothesis. That's the first one.
Oh, there you go.
The second one is simply titled "The Evidence." Go up. There it is on the right-hand side.
Oh,
The
right here.
evidence, right?
Oh, there it is. You see it? Yahwist, Yellowist,
Yeah.
Deuteronomy, right
And
there.
the third one is the end of Genesis apologetics. So
Okay,
basically,
nice.
in these 3 videos, and it's about an hour and a half material in total, I've basically provided like a brief historical synopsis of the documentary hypothesis itself, and why scholars came to think it was compelling. In the second video, I just dump piles of evidence, the evidence itself for the documentary hypothesis, and in the third one, I basically counter some of the attempts to show that the Torah is a unity. So if people are interested in this, I encourage you to watch those sets of videos. Again, I'm super biased, but as far as I know, it's like the best source on YouTube where you can actually see the evidence itself and not just scholars talking
Yeah.
about the evidence.
Yeah, you do a good
So,
job of that. You do a good
all
like
right.
showing the people the stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so do the Dead Sea Scrolls strengthen the JADP hypothesis? Do they lend any support to the idea of uh, the documentary hypothesis or the source theory? And um, I think the simple answer is no, they don't. At least not directly.
Sure.
What they do though is they help to show how sources were transmitted um in such a way that matches very closely to how scholars understand the sources of the Pentateuch to have been transmitted. The whole problem here is that uh, the editorial activity that took place within the Torah happened like at the very latest in the Persian period. We're talking like the 400s BC. We just don't have any manuscripts that go back nearly that far, and anything that survived after that is properly Torah, like the Torah as as we have it now. But what we do have is we have other texts from Qumran that exist in multiple copies. Um, what I did my PhD dissertation actually on a collection of manuscripts known as the Apocryphon of Jeremiah, and one of the things that I did in my in my research project was to show the relationship of these manuscripts to one another, and where an editor actually came along and took what was in this earlier version and basically rewrote it, uh, following a same basic outline, pulling whole phrases out and key words from the original, but then basically turning it into a new version, which it is on the face of it not recognizable as the same story. It's pretty wild. But there's other texts like this in the Dead Sea Scrolls too. There are multiple versions of the Serach HaYachad, or what's called S. And they show this progression of development. There are we have sources for something we didn't even talk about at all today, was the War Scroll.
Yeah.
Which is a fascinating
Yeah, we
text.
did a whole video on that. Me and you. Check
You
that
and
out.
I did a video on
Yeah.
that, and I talked a little bit about
Fascinating
this,
stuff. The
right?
sons of light and the sons of
Yeah.
darkness.
So what's
Almost
really
sounds
cool?
kind of Gnostic-y in a way.
Oh yeah, what's really cool about the War Scroll? We didn't know about it before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but something else that we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls are sources for the War Scroll. So we actually can see
That's crazy.
an earlier stage of development before it became, the War Scroll.
Right.
So this is the kind of stuff that we have, which strengthens scholars' convictions that they're right about the process of
Sure.
transmission of the texts of
Yeah.
the Torah.
That's fascinating. Thank you for that question. That was a great question and a great answer as well. Paul Kickling is back with another one. Thank you, Paul.
Oh,
That question by Pegasus is stupid. Hey, no beefing in the chat. It's all in the scriptures. There's a negative order that is conducting a holy war through information i.e., what our world is. Tension is a very known mysticism.
I really have no idea what's going on. So
Yeah, it's an interesting
I'm
comment. That's an
sorry.
interesting comment. Thank you for that super chat. I
Oh.
appreciate it. I appreciate it. Let's see. Oh, Constellation is clapping back. Constellation is clapping back. Thank you for the super chat. Why would scribes or whoever weave two different stories into one? Were they confused on what they were writing down?
Oh,
Can I try to guess?
yeah, go ahead.
You got one source up in the north. People live the Samaritans. I don't know, maybe not the Samaritans. Let's say the Galileans have their scroll, and whoever scribe wrote that scroll has a little bit of a difference in what they thought happened in the story. Then there's another scroll down in Jerusalem, and they're like, "Oh, Joseph got sold to the Midianites." And I said before, the people in Galilee, no, Joseph got sold to the Edomites or whoever, Ishmaelites. And then so now you have two different sources, and when those sources get brought together, they sort of the scribe who's copying the sources puts them both in.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah,
right?
it's that's pretty good. I want to say on that Joseph story that you alluded to, when you separate the sources out, a couple of other interesting things happen. In one of the sources, Jacob is referred to exclusively as Israel, where in the other one he's referred to exclusively as Jacob. And in one of the sources, it's a story of Joseph the incredible dreamer, and in the other one, it's the story of Joseph and his incredible coat of many colors, right?
Big
So
difference.
just by way of a bit of historical background here, one of the prevailing ideas is that what's preserved in the Torah is material that came from the north, from the kingdom of Israel or the kingdom of Samaria, which
Yeah.
was separate from the kingdom of Judah in the south or Jerusalem. Um, and at the
They
time,
were kind of the bad guys, like they kind of broke the laws a little bit, according to the Torah. I'm not sure if that's true.
well,
That's
no,
according
I
to
mean,
the story.
I think what's it's important to point out here that they both, I mean, these were all Israelites. They all
Right.
worshipped Yahweh. They all, they were very, very, very close to one another. Um, but they each had their own individual sets of traditions
Right.
or takes. They had their own individual takes on various traditions. So they would have, like, there's a Joseph story in the north, there's a Joseph story in the south. Um, and around the time of the reign of Hezekiah, uh, the um, sorry, who is it? The Assyrians Sennacherib came and basically uh, destroyed the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Samaria. And what happened as a result of this is huge numbers of refugees came from Samaria down and settled in Judah. We can see some of this taking place in the early parts of the book of Isaiah. Some of the stuff that Isaiah is prophesying and saying is in response to this huge influx of refugees from the north that are basically, you know, causing a population explosion in the city of Jerusalem. And these people, they're bringing their texts with them too. Those who are wealthy and educated are bringing their text to them. They're adding them basically to the library of texts that they have in Jerusalem. And over time, these now they're getting preserved and copied side by side. Um, the great program, the great editorial program of the the fifth or the fourth century after the destruction of Jerusalem, after the Babylonian exile, was to basically uh, redact and compile all the traditions,
Right.
right? So, but there were concerns, I think, to ensure that they did justice to all the traditions while trying also to put them all together. And basically, this is what we ended up with.
Yeah.
I don't think they were confused about what they were writing down. I think they were at pains
I think they're just trying to
to
conserve everything.
yeah
Yeah.
to conserve everything, and also to um put it into a coherent narrative framework. um and that's difficult. and they did it in different ways too. Like in some places, like in the Joseph story, in the story of Noah, they just dovetailed this stuff together.
Right.
One you'll see it's like one source, then another source, then one. It's back and forth kind of thing. In other places, such as in there's two separate. I talked about this actually just last week in a stream I did with Derek on Myth Vision. There's two versions of what scholars tend to think is the same genealogy preserved in Genesis 4 and then in Genesis 5,
Right. I've noticed that.
preserved
I've noticed
completely separately, right? Same thing with the creation stories. In Genesis 2, there's a creation story, um, but then in Genesis 1, and I tend to think that this is something that came along quite a bit later. Uh, uh, this was written as a response, basically, uh, to all the religious and the cosmological ideas that were being absorbed from Babylon.
Right.
But they didn't want to interfere with their the original creation story that existed in Genesis chapter
Okay.
2. So they kept both of them and they kept them separate.
Yeah. It kind of makes sense if you think about it. And another one from Constellation Pegasus. Since there was such a gulf between educated and non-educated people in ancient Israel, is the Hebrew Bible being used as people to control people and keep people in power? Sorry, I'm looking at something else at the same time. I'm behind on so much and every day ancient living and government controls.
Yeah. So yeah, that this is something that needs to be pointed out too, and maybe emphasized, is that at the time period when the texts of the Hebrew Bible were being written and being passed along, literacy was extremely low.
Right.
Like fractions of a percent of just men, really, were trained to read and write. Um, in antiquity, we can see evidence that when writing was invented and for the first number of centuries while it took place, it was something that was viewed as kind of magical. It was controlled by the priesthood. I particularly think there's some evidence of this. For example, in the so-called soda ritual from Numbers chapter 5, this is the abortion concoction. Um, you'll notice that one of the aspects of that ritual is to write something on a tablet. The priest is supposed to write something on a tablet. He then grinds it up and then mixes it with this concoction and gives it to the woman suspected of adultery to drink. Right? This is magic, and I think it's
Wow.
pretty clear evidence that there's an idea that there's something magical about the writing, right? That goes into this concoction that affects some kind of change. So, and no doubt, common people who couldn't write viewed it as incredibly mysterious and you know numinous.
Right.
The inscriptions that kings would leave on stele in conquered territories, or that they would put on palace walls, or these sorts of things, these were not for common people to read. These were messages to the gods. Writing was not there was a time when it was not just primarily about communication. It was about power.
Right.
um Now, having said that, I'll say something else too. I don't know how effective it was,
Sure.
because I tend to think that in my historical reconstruction of the of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, I tend to see the the power brokers, the establishment of the monarchy in Jerusalem and the Jerusalem temple, as closely connected, but absolutely completely isolated from the rest of the people just living out on the land. And we see this in the archaeological record too. The people, the religion of the common people in Israel during the period of the kings was, I mean, it it was Canaan. It was Canaanite religion.
Right.
There wasn't.
The archaeology tells us, and that's just what it is.
So, that suggests to us that the Yahweh cult didn't really have a tremendous, wide-ranging impact on the lives of the common people.
Yeah.
So, but yes, absolutely. There's definitely power structures that work within the texts of the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah. Thank you for that super chat. There's another one from Constellation Pegasus who's just making it rain on me today for some reason. Thank you for that super chat. I appreciate that. Tell Paul to explain why quarks are difficult to kick out of a nucleus. If he's so smart, one answer in 1 minute of this. What's the force carrier particle of quantum?
I don't know what's going on.
He's just trying to get us, trying to make us look bad. Come on, Constellation.
He's just paying you, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. You don't have to keep.
We appreciate the money,
but I love it, and thank you. And let's see what else we got. Oh, what do you know? It's Constellation Pegasus again. He said, "Sorry, Paul, you lost."
I don't know. I don't know what's going on.
No, but
and I'm not weighing in on a winner or a loser.
Oh, I can't. Yeah, I can't. I can't. If I was trying to read everything while I'm listening to you, it wouldn't work. This is actually the last one, though.
All right.
So,
the Constellation Pegasus one.
Yeah.
Where are we at? This has been
an hour and 45.
Almost 2 hours.
Yeah,
probably a good time to
close it out, man.
And close it off.
Let me show your channel. Oh, that's not your channel. What the hell's going on there? Can you see it now?
There it is. Yeah,
okay.
I see it.
Yeah, guys, go and subscribe to Kipp Davis. You're gonna get scholarly resource for information. He's a Ph.D. He's wrote your dissertation on. What'd you say was the
Apocryphon of Jeremiah?
Yes,
and Jeremiah traditions in the Second Temple Judaism.
Yes, you have your hand up.
Can I? Yeah, I saw this in the chat. Lord Roku, he didn't pay for this one, but I feel like.
Oh yeah. Oh, is this the one right here?
Yeah, Dr. Kipp, tell us more about the alternative Deuteronomy that makes Yahweh speak in the first person.
Let's do it.
So yes, the Temple Scroll is an amazing manuscript. We know it only from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and there's this amazing, nearly complete copy that came from Cave 11. But then there's other manuscripts from Cave 4 that look like they could also have been copies of the Temple Scroll, but they're too fragmentary to really know. And again, there's textual differences, so it's kind of like, oh, what do we have here? So the Temple Scroll is so named because a huge amount of it is occupied with rules and information, instructions, measurements for the future celestial temple that is to be built in the end of the age. Because you see, the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls and collected them were by and large convinced that the current temple and the current temple establishment in Jerusalem was irredeemably corrupt, and that they would they would be obliterated in the future when Yahweh finally came back, when God finally came back to defeat the powers of darkness and all of the enemies of the true Israel, at which time they would establish a new temple. So the Temple Scroll contains tons and tons of information about this new temple, the new, the temple practices, the cycle of sacrifices. What's really interesting is that it's written in such a way that it's in the first person. It's written in the first person, but from the perspective of Yahweh. From a textual perspective, huge amounts of the Temple Scroll just basically copy straight from the book of Deuteronomy. But instead of it being Moses who's speaking, it's Yahweh himself.
Mm,
It's pretty cool. Um,
it is.
and one of the other aspects of the temple scroll, which is really interesting, is um it elevates the status of the Levites
Oh wow.
relative to the sacrificing priests, which are known as the Bnei Acharon, or the sons of Aaron, or the Zadokites,
Right.
in the Jerusalem temple. So it's a really, really interesting text. Um, it's from just a like a text critical perspective, and its relationship to the book of Deuteronomy, from like a religious perspective in terms of how it understood um the the function of scripture, and from the way that it basically rewrote the text as a way to lend it an air of authority, by basically saying, well, this is the very words of Yahweh himself. And then also from like an eschatological perspective in terms of
That's
its
interesting.
views on the end times. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah,
So we
we
should probably call it there.
yeah, we should we definitely at some point have to do a episode on the different Deuteronomy manuscripts, and
Yeah.
the polytheism in the Old Testament is another one I want to
Sure.
touch.
Yeah, we
So
can
we'll definitely
do
touch on
some,
these topics again.
maybe someday.
Yeah, we will. We will. Promise you guys. But yeah, guys, so go and subscribe to Kipp Davis. Scholarly information and great editing too. Good job in the editing.
Oh, thanks, man.
It's just it really is a great channel. It's one of my every time you upload a new video, I can't wait to see it.
And it's not
So,
been very active recently, but I actually hope to get something new up, hopefully by the end of November.
awesome.
I should have my first Dead Sea Scrolls series video up by then, and the first one will be all about uh what the Dead Sea Scrolls has to say with regards to the Bible and the biblical text. I'm
Nice.
pretty excited. My brother's gonna, I hope, I think he's gonna put together some music uh for the uh for the video series. I've been inspired deeply by the soundtrack from Raiders of the Lost Ark. So
Nice. Nice.
there's gonna be there's gonna be some echoes of that
That's awesome.
in there. Um yeah.
Sounds
So
good.
something else that I wanted to mention,
Sure.
in the future, I have plans. Nothing's settled yet, but I figured I would mention that I'm working with Derek from Myth Vision on putting together
Oh yeah.
a course for his new Myth Vision courses.
And I'll have the link on this channel as well. So
Oh yeah, nice.
be on the lookout for that.
So, just I did a number of years ago. I taught a whole course on the religions of ancient Israel, and I made I turned it into a video course, and a number of the videos from that course are actually on my channel. But I'm redoing the whole thing. And
Oh, that's
one of the
awesome.
reasons I'm redoing it is because even though most of the video lectures are on my channel, there's a bunch of them that got flagged
Oh
and
yeah.
entirely blocked because of copyright issues. So, like, I have a whole lecture on there about the relationship between the Dead Sea Scrolls, apocalypticism,
How does someone else
and
own your lecture?
well, this is it, right? The whole lecture is about the relationship between the Dead Sea Scrolls, apocalypticism, and AMC's hit TV series, The Walking Dead.
Oh, that's why. Okay.
Right?
That'll
So
do it.
that's why.
That'll do it.
But it's based on a paper that I wrote a number of years ago. It's one of the best things I think I've ever written. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that I'll finally be able to get out there. for people to see. So
awesome.
keep your eyes open for that too. Hopefully that is coming sometime in the new year.
I cannot wait. And you have just attained true Gnosis.
You have just attained true Gnosis. The Demiurge has no power over